One, two, three, four.
Hi, and welcome to the Vininspo podcast with me, Ed Merrison. This is where wine is a travel experience. Join us as we pick up bits and pieces, make new friends, and create memories that make our future interactions with wine, people, and places all the more meaningful and fun. My guest on this week's podcast is Jeff Porter, writer-at-large at Wine Enthusiast, specialising in northern and central Italy. Texan native Jeff now lives in Torino, and we recorded a brief bonus segment on his latest vino-related revelations since moving to Italy 18 months ago. We spoke about a love of music that overcame being teased as a tubby tuba player, a chef that poured pity drinks for a stinking pot washer, how teaching kids taught him how to run a wine team, the desire to make people happy, breaking into the sommelier scene in Napa, LA, and New York, being wine director of a Manhattan restaurant doing over $20 million in annual sales with nothing but champagne and Italian wine on the list, 700 of the former, 4,000 of the latter, and moving from the restaurant floor into presenting and reviewing as an Italian wine evangelist. I started by asking Jeff to return to his childhood.
So I was born in a town called Webster, Texas, which is south of Houston, Texas by about an hour, and it's where NASA is. I spent a lot of my childhood going to NASA because I love it. I love the space, everything. My grandparents all used to work for NASA. That's why the family was down there. But when I was a baby, my dad got a new job, and we hopped around Texas from age 6 months until early elementary school, and we ended up in another small town north of Dallas, Texas, called Louisville. And it was like kind of a prototypical middle class, ticky-tack house upbringing, living in a giant suburban zone where just house after house after house. And listening to my parents, always been a happy person, so a happy kid, like smiling, loved to play, loved sports, loved music and art. I started playing guitar when I was 6. I never got very good, but I've always kept up with it. I'm a strummer, not a shredder, is what I like to say. Then when I was in middle school, we moved further out into the country because my dad really liked being in the middle of nowhere. And so my parents built a house and still in the same area, but like it just took longer to get everywhere. I'm the youngest by 7.5 years. And so my brother was kind of never around. So I was kind of an only kid, latchkey kid. Both my parents are professionals, learned to cook for myself, read a lot, played outside with my friends. And it was a very normal, very privileged background in that regard. We were never rich, but never wanting for anything.
It seems that you certainly enjoy being around other people. Were your parents quite outgoing, extrovert, gregarious?
Yeah, my mom is a social butterfly to this day. She'll be 75 this year. And she would just tell me, I joined the garden club and I'm doing this, I'm endorsing it. I'm just like, Jesus, Mom, you're 75. Relax. She can't. And my dad, it's interesting. My dad is an extrovert, but he spends his like emotional capital kind of being this like bigger than life personality, and then just likes to be by himself. So like growing up, they threw dinner parties and stuff. And my parents were the person where they always put me at the table, even if I was the only kid. So I had to like deal with adult conversations early on. And I enjoyed it. I liked learning and talking, and sometimes I was, told not to talk, but I did my thing.
And did you get involved in sort of drama and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I did like the school plays all through middle school, and then all through elementary school and middle school. I did some drama classes, but then I got really into music. When you go to middle school in the States and you join the band, you like get forced into an instrument. I got forced into the euphonium, which then evolved into the tuba because they needed a tuba player. That was a tough thing because I became very good at it, but I was also the stereotypical fat kid playing the tuba. So there was like a lot of bullying around that. But, persevered. I went through it.
Where did the studies take you?
My mom is a nurse practitioner, and she used to run this free clinic in our town. And I used to work there with her. And I love medicine, and I love the idea of helping people. And it was interesting. When I was growing up in the States, I was a heavy kid and I'd go to the doctors and be like, you have to lose weight. And they just like never try to help you. So I went to school with this idea of wanting to become a general practitioner, but get my degree in nutrition. And because then in my middle school, in my end of my high school, I decided to kind of transform my life and I joined the swim team and I lost a lot of weight. I got really healthy and I got really into like classic nutrition, not kind of like fad nutrition today stuff. Yeah, I went to the University of Texas, which is in Austin, and I started studying nutritional biochemistry, and that's when I got derailed by fermented grape juice.
And what did that look like?
So I was a really good student in high school, and my first semester in college, like I went to parties and stuff in high school, but I never really drank. I never had a girlfriend, and then I got to college, and girls were interested, and drinking was easy and accessible. So I ended up not going to class very often. And so my grades ended up after the first semester not being good. And it was a shock to me because I'd always done very well in school. And so I kind of like had to refocus. I used to speak German pretty well. I had this German American woman who was my hairdresser. She was cutting my hair and I was like, I really need a job. I need to focus. I need to get out of the party lifestyle. And she's like, oh, my dad owns a restaurant here. He's looking for a dishwasher. And I was like, connect us. So I went and I interviewed to be a dishwasher and I was 18, almost 19 at the time. And he hired me and I became a dishwasher on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturday nights and to take me out of the party scene. And if you've ever worked in a kitchen or been in a dishwasher dish pit, no one wants to go out with you. Even if it's only midnight, you can't get the stench of oil off. Like you have to scrub, you have to like sit in the shower in the fetal position with like steel wool, just trying to get the smell of oil out of you. It's disgusting. But I think he felt bad for me. He cooked me dinner every night I worked and he started giving me glasses of wine and saying like, oh, here's a story about this. He was from Berlin. He loved wine and nothing crazy. It would be like Santa Rita from Chile or, a simple Mosel Cabernet, something from the Nahe or Burgundy, but nothing ever crazy, no big names or anything. But I got really involved in the story. And so after like a year of that, I told my dad. Dad bought me Hugh Johnson's book, Wine, accompanied with a box of wine. And I started studying and doing like wine tastings in my apartment with my friends, underage drinking at its best.
Where did that progress to next?
In the States, you have to be 21 to get a job to like sell wine at a shop. And I found out there's this really nice grocery store in Austin called Central Market. And it was like the place where you could get all the gourmet things, like from all over the world. This is where like before Korean food was super popular in the States, you could get all the pastes. You get the best olive oil, everything. And being a lover of cooking too, I started going there and then I walked in this wine shop and it was in the center of the store and it was huge. And they had like 5 full-time wine stewards. And before I started turning 21, I'd hang out and ask them questions. I'd be like, oh, what do you think about this? And they're like, you can't buy the wine. But I was like, I just want to learn. And they also taught classes there. And a month before I turned 21, the boss said, okay, on January 21st, 1998, which was my birthday, he's like, there's a wine tasting of Santa Barbara wines at the Omni Hotel in downtown Austin. Come with me. Be my guest. Let's talk about your future here. And so I go to this wine tasting. I'd never been to a wine tasting before, so I dress up. It's crazy, early, Santa Barbara coming to Texas and tasting the wines. And I'd be like, it tastes like this. He'd be like, oh, what do you think? What does this smell like? And I didn't have the vocabulary or anything, but he was very, very generous. And then after it said, we'd like you to come work and be like the merchandiser. So the person that fills the shelves and doesn't talk to customers. And that's how I got my first wine job.
And so curious and gregarious, I'm sure that you made yourself more useful than they bargained for, and probably before you knew it, doing more than anyone expected.
100%. Yeah, no, I mean, I jumped in, I loved service and I liked helping people. My biggest ramp up in learning wine and is every day I worked, they would give me like a 3x5, like an index card with 5 wines on it. And before I got back to work, forever my next shift, I had to come back with 5 pieces of information per wine. So let's say the wine was 1990 La Vigna Barolo by Sandroni. I'd have to come back and I'd be like, okay, Barolo's in Piedmont. This was 1990 vintage, was like the grape is Nebbiolo. Sandrone, Lucio Sandrone started the winery here, and it's in it's in Italy or whatever, something like that. And I do that all the time. And this is before the internet was good at information. So I just had these books at home and like going through like Jancis Robbins and Hugh Johnson and just like all the classic writers and the Oxford Dictionary of Wine. That's how I learned. And it was an amazing experience.
Right. So how long were you at Central Market?
2 years. So I graduated school in December 99 and I decided I want to stay in wine and take a break from school. And so I stayed there and I became like an assistant buyer, started learning the buying side, and I worked there full time. It was great. And this was one of those stores where like the whole store was like a family unit. It was a fun time. But then I really wanted to get out of Texas. I also felt guilty for not kind of doing anything like for betterment of anybody. I was like, I was going to be a doctor and now I'm in wine. I mean, it was interesting because like the store had like everything from just box wine to like first growth Bordeaux. So you're selling everything, which was also a great experience. I always tell people, if you really want to know wine, make sure you work in a retail store that doesn't just cater to one level. You have to understand box wine as well as you do, you know, the best wines of the world. So there's this organization in the United States called Teach for America, and it's a nonprofit that gets people who didn't want to go into education to go into education for a minimum of 2 years and teach in an underprivileged area. So I applied for that, and you go through this huge, long, rigorous process where you have to do like a fake teaching lesson. And I applied to be a science teacher, and I wanted to go to New York or DC or Chicago. My last choice was Los Angeles, and that's where I got sent. Mhm. So I ended up teaching high school in South Central Los Angeles. And the whole goal of the program isn't necessarily to keep people in education because these are very like type A. Most of the people are from Ivy League schools like Harvard, Yale, Penn, and stuff like that. And I'm no matter what, no matter where you go to school, but it's to get people to like change their perspective. And so whatever position they become later in life, they have this perspective that education is paramount and they defend or promote or help, you know, channel their energy into what needs to happen in the underprivileged areas of America. And for me, it was informative because like I'm from a very monochromatic small town. You know, University of Texas is a very diverse place. And it was the first time I'd met really anybody of color and had those different experiences with people from South Texas or Mexican heritage or even African American or Asian. And then to go to a city like LA was just it was mind changing in every good and bad way.
Right. So with that in mind, that idea that it's changing your perspective, how did it, I suppose, help you fashion a path onto channeling that into doing what came next?
I mean, it's interesting. Restaurants are like high school. So I taught high school, right? Same sort of thing. Infighting, you tend to deal with a lot of younger people are transient. They come through if you stay. And working with 14-year-old to 18-year-olds really helped me hone, or at this point, not hone, but just learn how to convey information in a way that would be compelling, memorable, and also get the desired result for me as a teacher so they could progress. And the other thing, I think the biggest takeaway and the shocking part from a socio-political standpoint was if you have a class of 38 kids, and it's the same thing in a restaurant, let's say you have 38 employees, and two, and this is a horrible thing to say about children, but they may be shitheads, right? They may be bad actors. And when you first start out, you have this kind of savior complex, like, I'm going to take care of all the kids. Well, that means you're diverting all your energy to those two people and you're leaving 36 people behind, and it's shifting the dynamic of the class. And when you realize you can't, you've got to focus on the majority, not the minority. You can still help them out and hopefully bring a person into, be it in the restaurant, you know, be like, hey, let's focus your energy here. Maybe this style of learning is not for you, but let's get you excited. That really helped me become a better manager. It helped me become a better teacher, a better mentor, to understand those kind of dynamics.
Okay, so when did you get to put that into practice with a shift into restaurants?
In between teaching and getting my first front of house restaurant job, I moved to San Francisco or the Bay Area, and I became a wholesaler. I started working for this company called the Henry Wine Group. I thought I was a hot shit wine person at age 25. Like, oh, I know the ground crews, I know all this stuff. They put me in grocery merchandising, very humbling experience. You know, you don't really sell wine. You just go to grocery stores and you refill shelves and you make displays. I hated it. I hate it with every fiber of my body. because you don't really talk to anybody. No offense to the workers at the grocery stores. Most of the stores I worked at, they didn't give a shit about wine. They were just like, I need Edna Valley Chardonnay and I need this. And I'd be like, okay, whatever. But I did a ride along with this dude from Winebow, which is a big Italian importing company here in the States. And he was like, there's this restaurant in Napa Valley looking for a new wine director and sommelier. And I didn't know what either of those things meant. I'd never heard of a sommelier before. And I was like, yeah, cool. And so I went home and I this was before Google, but I searched on the internet, what is a sommelier? And I applied for the job, and it was like a 4-month interview process, but I got the job, and I started commuting from Oakland to Napa Valley, and that was my first, big fake it till you make it job, where I didn't know anything about anything. I mean, I knew about wine. I was very passionate about it. I studied. I'm very eager, but I come in at 25, 26 years old, and some of these old time waiters were not happy that I became the wine director, and they treated me like shit. I got pushed during service. I got yelled. It was awful. I go home crying. What's wrong with these people? There's one time I'm doing wine service and I'm pouring the wine, and the waiter comes behind me as I'm pouring and hits me in the back to make me, and luckily I didn't spill anything. I lost it. I go back to the thing, I'm poking him in the chest. You can't fucking do that. Pardon my English. And I think that's the first time I got respect from the staff, is stood up for myself. Then it just evolved there, and I learned so much being in wine country. And that's when my passion for Italian wine really started to emerge, because the list was primarily, obviously, Napa, California, and then Italian. So I was like, oh, these Italian wines are really, really stunning.
And were you at that time, despite the barriers that started off between you and the service staff on the floor, were you also soaking up the rudiments of hospitality, or at that stage was it more that you had a knack for trying to make people welcome and do it that way?
The desire to make people happy is an instinctive thing, but understanding the nuance and flow of hospitality was something that had to be learned, because you can be performative and stand at a table for a very long, long time and make that table happy. But if you're not in your mind thinking forward about service and moving service along, you're leaving other people behind. So understanding time management is an extremely important part of service. But just seeing the floor, the general manager there when I was training, it's such a beautiful dining room. It's this restaurant called Trevina. It's now a restaurant called Charter Oak, but it's this beautiful, looks like an old Tuscan villa with a giant outside patio. But when you walk in the wintertime, they just have this one big room, huge ceilings, and the lighting's beautiful. There was a wood-fired oven in the corner, and you could see the flames kind of flow. You know how when fire does the thing where it just looks like it's in ballet? It was so thoughtful the way they designed it, because that's what everybody saw. It was the focal point of the room. And he walked in and he opened these big velvet curtains, and he's like, look at this room, Jeff. You're the host of the party. This is your party. Your only job is to continue to make them happier. He's like, what's better in life than that? And that just has always stuck with me. It's like, this is your party, and your job is just to keep these smiles happening and keeping things moving along. And it really, really informed the rest of my life from then on out for the past 20 some odd years.
Yeah, and I guess a certain element of, I suppose, that theatre. I mean, it's not performance as faking it, but it's definitely the idea that people are walking into something where the show begins and you're there for a good time. So where was next on the agenda for you?
Napa Valley is a beautiful place, but in your 20s, it's a very boring place. And it's also a one economy town, right? There's the wine business and then the restaurant businesses that support the wine business. So my partner is not in the wine business and is an artist and designer. And she's like, we got to go to the city. And I really wanted to move into fine dining. So I had applied to restaurants all over the States, all the fancy restaurants in New York, Chicago, LA, and interviews. And they look at me, they're like, oh, you're like a bull in a china store. You don't have enough polish. It's like, F you guys. I have polish. I can dress up. But I got none of those jobs. And I got a job in a restaurant in Southern California at this very, very fancy hotel, but they put me in what's called the secondary restaurants, the breakfast, lunch, dinner restaurant, kind of the cafe. It was a good wine list, but I was like, I don't want to fucking do that. I want to be on the stage. And so we had to move in with my in-laws because they didn't have a job. And for a month, we lived in Los Angeles while we were both looking for work. And finally, this grocery store company in the Bay Area called Andronico's Market, which was very similar, and also in this cooperative buying program with Central Market I started with, reached out and said, hey, we're trying to redefine our wine program and make our wine shops within our grocery stores seem more hospitality focused, more restaurant styled. And, you were recommended to us by Central Market. I was like, amazing. So I go and interview, and that's what I became the corporate wine director for 10 stores. The goal was, because it was a family-owned grocery store, and at the time, like Whole Foods was becoming big. There's another big chain called Safeway, and they couldn't compete due to economies of scale on price of those like kind of more mass marketed wines. So they kind of gave me the reins to be like, okay, make it a little more, make it like a restaurant, like a full restaurant wine list within the stores. And certain stores were small wine sets and some were very big. But like, for example, I'll never forget this, because the family Andronikos is a Greek name. I got contacted by the Greek wine something. This is like in 2006. I went to Greece. I came back and like I put together in caps. So every store got 50 cases of mixed Greek wine. So we had Persigalis Assyrtiko for $10 a bottle on the shelf. And we like blew the roofs off. We had Mavrodaphne, Assyrtiko, Zinomavro in '06 at a grocery store. And then I started a private label program of Malbec and Torrontés, and then these biodynamic Cab Francs and Sauv Blancs that we could sell for like 12, $13. And that went off really, really well. But then they had made some financial decisions in 2001 before the first tech crash. And then '08 was coming, and the company was like heavily leveraged in debt. None of us knew. And so the company just started kind of crumbling when '08 hit. And so I was studying for my master's sommelier exam, then on my advanced part of the sommelier path. So I decided to get back in restaurants. And a friend said, hey, there's this new restaurant open in LA. They're looking for a wine director. It's with Mario Batali and Joe Bastianich and Nancy Silverton. I was like, oh, that's super cool. Like, Mario was an idol of mine because of his cooking show. I knew Joe because I'd met him a few years ago because I'd wanted to open my own restaurant, and he took a meeting. And then Nancy Silverton is arguably one of the most important American chefs, kind of helped. I mean, she's in the pantheon with me with like, Julia Child, the very famous restaurant, and Alice Waters and Nancy, I think, are three most important people. And so I went there and I got that job and I moved to LA. Now it was 100% Italian wine, not even champagne on that wine list. There is champagne today, which is the smart move. But yeah, that's when my path really started to focus and narrow in.
By this stage, obviously studying for those exams, and you've had a taste of the hospitality side, the theatre, I guess, the ability as well to put some quite creative stuff together in your first job down in Southern California. So you're ready for this by now.
Yeah, I loved every moment. It's ballet, it's sport, it's theater, it's entertainment, it's stressful. It's the stress that you love to hate, but you can't. It becomes a drug. I love team sports. I like being with people. I'm a social person. It's one of the hardest things about what I do now. It's very lonely, and I struggle with that. To this day, I love doing service. It's fun. But my LA days were fast. Like, I started performing well, and 18 months after I moved there and got things going, Joe Bastianich called, and he's like, we'd like you to come to Del Posto. And going to Del Posto within the group is like, it's the mothership. I mean, it's what I've always wanted. It just gotten 4 stars in the New York Times. It's like, I'm ready. He said, can you move there in 4 weeks? And we're like, 4 weeks to move across the country? It's tough. But we did it in 6. And we got there, and we had to live from March to May, like in sublets on people's couches because we couldn't find an apartment. So I was working full time. My wife had gotten a job. We're just trying to figure this out in a new city. that New York is not the easiest place in the world, but it's my favorite place in the United States for sure.
Yeah, and kind of hitting the big time in what you want to do as well, in the center of the universe for that. And I guess it's just a heck of a pace and just scale. It must have been off the chart. What was it like?
I mean, I thought I was like big time in LA because I was dealing like all the Hollywood elite. You can think of every famous person you've ever met in front or behind the camera, music, whatever. Met them, shook their hand, nice people for the most part. And I was like, oh, I sold some cool bottles. Well, then when you move to New York, you're dealing with the titans of finance and industry who have more money than anybody on earth. And you're at a fancy restaurant where the average check is like $300-400 per person. You start to open wines that you can't even fathom. And it was funny because, I'm never like a go for the jugular kind of person. And the sommeliers are paid, then they're paid as like a pool percentage of sales. I was salaried, but I also worked the floor and sold wines. So they wanted me to add to that pool, right? And I would like undersell to guests. And one day the sommeliers took me aside, like, listen, you're our boss, but we've been here longer than you. We know New York. You need to step up your game. And it was like, oh shit. Okay, I get it. And then I started understanding the dynamics of what I could sell. The goal for me and what I try to teach people in hospitality is the goal is never to like have a one-time customer, it's to have a lifetime customer. So the goal is in the wine part of the side is to find what's right for that person, help them however they want, teach them whatever can get them to become part of the family of your restaurant is the goal, because a lifelong customer is way better financially than just going for the jugular one time.
And did you enjoy being part of the team, or in fact leading a team there?
Very much so. And, Del Posto was one of those places, a big restaurant, 51 tables, 2 floors, well, 3 floors. Wine cellar was down 2 flights of stairs. It was a very athletic job, geared on service, live piano playing, marble everywhere. It's a stunning, stunning restaurant, great food. And we had every night 5 sommeliers, including myself, working the floor. So the team was of 7 or 8 all the time. And that's when I really turn on, again, my teaching hat is like, we started study groups, not just with the sommelier team, but with any staff that wanted to become a sommelier. We kind of put that in focus. I got the company to invest in paying for people's sommelier exams. And then because of the positioning and kind of the way I looked at it, I told any producer that this was basically their ambassador's house. If they wanted a place to just post up and do some work and have some coffee, I mean, we always set a place aside for any producer from Italy that came to town. And that's how I really get all these connections and become quite friendly with a lot of these producers, because we created a space that felt comfortable for them. And then in return, they would like be super generous with the staff and teach and do these mini master classes for the staff. Del Posto became like the center of Italian wine education for a few years in New York City, which was super cool.
It must have been pretty high pressure, though, as well, because you've got people going in there ready to write big checks, but at the same time, probably with very high expectations, managing a huge program and staff. How was that for you?
Stressful. I worked a lot. It's like, minimum 12-hour days, not unheard of to have 16-hour days. It's the restaurant business in New York City. We, on the weekends, we opened our doors for seatings at 4:30 p.m., which is insane. And then the last seating, not when the doors closed, but the last seating, the menu was usually 2.5 to 3 hours long, was at 11:30. And we'd be booked the whole time, full. My job as the wine director at that part was to manage the finances, the budget, work with the GM. We had a lot of meetings because it was a big business. It was at the height, the whole restaurant, including banquets, dining, all the stuff combined was like a $24-25 million business.
And an entirely, well, not entirely Italian list, because you're a massive champagne head, and I assume that was going gangbusters there as well. But by now you're really down deep into your love of Italian wine.
So we just, champagne and Italian. That's it. No Burgundy, nothing, which is fine with me. I mean, don't get me wrong. I had a French wine a few weeks ago, but I can just get by on champagne and Italian wine. It's fine. But at one point I went apeshit with champagne. I wanted to make the biggest champagne selection. It was kind of unfortunate. We never got the due that we should have had. A lot of industry people were super psyched about it. We had 700 selections of champagne and then 4,000 selections of Italian wine. It was a big, big list. And it was interesting because like I built up this huge champagne list with great growers, classic houses, new up and comers. We had poured like Prévost by the glass at one point, like early on, and like now you can't even find those bottles. But I noticed that champagne wasn't selling, and I was like, oh man, this really sucks. What can we do? And another restaurant around across town had become like a pizzeria had become famous for having champagne at retail prices, and they were like doing gangbusters. And I was like, it's a great idea. And then I did an experiment. I moved all the champagne pricing to just retail pricing. And then we just started to see the wine move because champagne, everyone always ordered a bottle of red for the most part, no matter what. 97% of all tables ordered at least one bottle of wine, which is huge. And then once we decreased the price, we saw champagne became additive. So they're like, oh wow, this is great pricing. I get one bottle. It's the same price as getting 4 glasses, but you don't have to worry about anything being flat. And so people would order the champagne, then they'd order 2 more bottles of wet because it kind of wet the whistle, grease the wheels, and you move in with some more wine. But that was pretty awesome.
Where did the love of champagne go back to?
I think it's part of my DNA. My mom loved sparkling wine, not champagne. She was one of the people that just called, if it had bubbles, it was called champagne. I remember this one time we were on vacation. I was a little kid and I'd really pissed my mom off. And she was just like, I need champagne. I need champagne every day. And that always stuck with me too. But I don't know. I remember, okay, first job, Central Market, back in Austin, Texas. One of my mentors gave me a bottle of Beer Cart Saumon Brut Rosé. I was trying to woo this young lady to go on a date with me. Not my mentor, but this other girl. And she's like, go. Her name was Amy. She was like, go drink this with Amy. And I drank it with Amy, and things went really well. So maybe that's why I like champagne so much.
It is as good a reason as any. Thank you, Amy. And so we should move on to modern times because you now find yourself, it seems to me, doing quite a lot of events and stuff around restaurants, but you're writing now and living in Italy. So how did that move come about and how's that treating you?
So at a certain point at Del Posto, they made me the corporate beverage director. And so I did that for a few years. So I started running all the restaurants in the group. I learned a lot doing that. But then 2019, I kind of reached a tipping point. I had a young daughter. I wasn't seeing my family very much, and I wanted to kind of just make a big change. And I'd been really interested in media. So I'd always had this idea for like a TV show. And so I pitched like for a web series, and I got the funding for that. And so in 2019, we started filming this thing called Sip Trip, which is on YouTube. And we made 14 episodes, and we spent a total of 90 days in Italy with 2 cameras, sound guy, director, me, and then I would bring some sommeliers. So the whole idea was kind of like make it a buddy road trip and show Italy, because I always went on these, the wine trips that you take as a professional, and people was like, oh, that sounds so cool. I want to do it too. And so I was like, well, let's show them what it's like. And so that's the whole crux of the show. And that's kind of what got me out of restaurants. At the end of 2019, someone asked me, hey, he's like, oh, would you want to start an import distribution company? I was like, sure. They're like, okay, write a business plan. So I did that. I got funded for that. And then beginning of 2020, we rolled out Sip Trip. I started working on my portfolio for the import company. And then COVID happened and kind of Sip Trip got lost and then refound about 2 years later. But then my import company sunk before it started. And then that led to Wine Enthusiast calling me in 2022, being like, hey, we know you closed your import company. Would you be interested in writing for us? And I was like, I've always wanted to do that. And so I started that. At Wine Enthusiast, we're called Writers at Large, and we're not full-time staff, freelance writers. I just have a beat, right? So like when I want to do stories, I have to pitch stories. I'm not guaranteed any columns or anything I have to pitch. I've got 2 pieces that'll come out later this year that I pitched earlier, one on Emilia Romagna and then another one like a profile piece. But then my main job for the magazine is I do the reviewing for Northern Italy. So Umbria and Marche North, I do. And then I have a colleague who's become a dear friend named Danielle Caligari. She takes care of the South. And her full-time job is she's a professor of Italian cultural studies at Dartmouth University. She's like a super brainiac. And then because I don't have a full-time job and I started doing events, I do a lot of wine education. I get hired by consortii to like Chianti Classico, Umbria, Sicily. I go around the States doing like wine classes for sommeliers, trade. And then I also started doing some partnering with restaurants to do guided tours here in Italy to different wine regions. And my wife and I were like, no, you're spending so much time in Italy. Why don't we see if we can move there? We left New York December 25th, 2023.
How's the move going?
Amazing. Love it. It's not all roses, right? It's difficult. None of us spoke the language beforehand. I knew obviously how to say some things and I could parrot back, but I never studied Italian, so I didn't know the grammar. And so my wife and I, the first month here, took like a full month off just to do intensive Italian studies. And it's a very, very difficult language. Latin, I don't know if you speak Spanish or French or Italian or Portuguese, but Latin languages are crazy. So many verb conjugations. It seems like such a waste of time. I think however we evolved into English, that's how we increased our productivity, is we became workaholics because we left all the verbs behind.
I tell you what, you don't often hear people who learnt German first complaining about how hard Latin languages are.
German felt very like, okay, I get the structure. It's like, but like, I'm like, why are there 13 different verb conjugations? That seems like a waste of time. But the Italians go like, we really only use like 4, so don't worry about it. And then I continued learning that, but like overall, the move's been very, very positive. Torino, we live in Torino, which is the 4th largest city in Italy. Northwestern Italy was the former capital of Italy when Italy first formed into a country in 1861. And it's a stunning, stunning city. It's baroque. It's classical because it was where the king of Savoy lived, so he wanted the town to be fancy. So it's just gorgeous. Big piazzas, lots of. It's funny. I always say, "Oh, it's the piazza with the horse statue," and everybody looks at me as like every piazza has a horse statue.
Well, I've got a wife who is an artist, and she always wishes that I had a better paid job. So yours obviously has a fair bit of patience, but presumably living in Italy's probably made her a bit more cheerful about the whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. It's interesting, like going from New York, one of the world's great cities. Something you don't realize until you leave a city like New York is you never realize that the city itself is a member of your family, and it's the destructive member of your family. It's the family that causes the chaos, or the member of your family. Because like the moment you walk out of your door in New York City, there's cacophony. There's who knows what the trains are doing. Are you going to bump into someone and they're going to yell at you? Is the cab not going to stop? You never know, right? And then when you come to a place like Torino, New York City is 9 million people. Torino's a little under 1 million proper. And it's a very walkable city. There's a calm and a quiet here that until you're out of New York, you didn't realize how much energy and stress that part was causing. And you get to kind of like relax in the brain. Like I still work a lot and I travel a lot, but like it's just a different way of living, which is what I really like.
Well, we're going to return to Italy later in this conversation to talk about some of your more recent discoveries there. But first, I want to take you to a place where your brain definitely relaxed, and that is Mildura in Australia. Now, I met you not long before you made the move to Torino at the Australian Alternative Varieties Wine Show, and I thought it would be worth asking your perspective on what you discovered. I mean, you spent so long immersed in Italian wine proper, and in this show we're talking about, it features a lot of Australian takes on Mediterranean grapes. I wondered what you thought about what wine growers here are doing with alternative varieties, and I suppose alternative thinking around how wine culture is evolving and where it might be going.
My trip to Australia, and this was November 2023, so just a month before I left the States, was the most informative wine experience I've ever had in my life. It changed everything for me. It opened my eyes to everything, and it helped me evolve this philosophy that I've started kind of living by, but also like from a wine perspective, but also a personal perspective that I call pedicé no, why not? And that was kind of the Australian thinking, like, well, I can plant this here, why not? And people are cool with it, like, it didn't work. Okay, oh, it worked really well. And just that thinking is not super Italian, right? But then just the experimentation, the thoughtfulness. I think the beauty of Australia, it's a country that I would also love to live in, is there's just a joyous way of living. And it's not all rose-colored glasses, right? in Australia either, but like I think within the wine, you can taste this energy, you can taste this thoughtfulness. And like I tried some Sangiovese's Aglianico that I gave like best award to, which I talked to a producer of Basilicata here the other day. He's like, I got to try it. It was such a profound experience to go all across Victoria from Yarra Yarra to like King Valley to Mildura and meet all of y'all. Like you all had a profound impact. The way you spoke about wine, the way you looked at it, analyzed it, being with journalists, winemakers, every part of my brain changed because of the experience in such a positive way. I look at wine in a more three-dimensional way than I was doing before.
That's really cool to hear. Now we're going to go from something then that is very new without the rules written to something, I suppose, where there's a lot of tradition baked in. And we'll start with one that I know is very dear to your heart, very dear to my heart, and really, I guess, dear to pretty much anyone's heart if they like wine. And that is Barolo. I remember you talking about how you started a long time ago to list Barolo wines by MGA, that is to say the specific cru where they're growing the vineyards. Now that, especially then, was pretty bold. I mean, it's pretty niche geek stuff even now. But you're not the type, I don't think, to alienate people, but much more the kind to invite them in. So it struck me as an interesting way of looking at it, that you can invite people in and still lay down a bit of a challenge as a conversation starter, I guess. So was that the idea, not to shut the door, but to open one onto all that wonder?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, because everyone is like, oh, I'm always confused about wine. I don't have the language. And it's just like, you have, it's subjective to an extent, but everyone has experience, and we can apply that to how we taste or analyze wine for pleasure, enjoyment, or professionally. But I think if you force questions, it it tends to open more doors than it does. Some people may not like it, but I would say the majority of the people are like, "Oh, this is interesting. Let me ask somebody." Because in the moment you get to ask, the moment you get to open that door, and you get to, bring that person along with you, the journey is just that much sweeter. And for Barolo, you know, before the true codification with the MGAs in '08, there were the crews and people, they'd be like, what's this? What's that? Is it better than just a blended? And I just try to be, there's no better, it's just different. But it just helps tell that story. Like I like specificity. Like I like it in Chianti Classico. They're doing it in Soave now. Sometimes they can go overboard because that's just kind of what Italians do. But I think when you can force people to have to ask questions in this regard, it leads to a whole new conversation that just can really increase and elevate someone's experience, which is the ultimate goal.
Which Italian wines, which regions or grape varieties were the first to really draw you in?
It was Piedmont. It was Barolo Barbaresco, 100%. I remember tasting. So the first Barolo I ever had was the 1990 Lavinia from Sandrone. This was in their kind of more modern day, so it was like a little more flashy, polished with some new oak on it. I was used to California wine, and when I tried that wine, there's still the acidity, the framing of the tannin, the way the tannins sit on your palate with Nebbiolo, even an oak is different than Cabernet Sauvignon or Syrah or Pinot or whatnot. But I think the thing I've always loved about Italian wine in general is the verve it gives you, but then also, for some reason, to me, the wines are visceral. They start in your stomach, in your heart, and then they move to your brain, where I feel like we impose so much information or thought on French wine. It has to start here, and then it might move down. And I'm a visceral person. I'm very emotional. And so I like that Italian wine. There's just something that it just captures you from an emotional perspective first, then an intellectual perspective.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. You've dealt with people from all kinds, as you say. You've sold the boxes right up to the Grand Cru in your various jobs right from day one, really. If you're new-ish to Italian wine, you're just trying to find out some of the big touch points, which kind of things would you point out to stretch that palate and stretch that sensory awareness?
It's a good question. It's a big question, because the beauty and challenge of coming into Italian wine is the fact that there's so many grapes and they're specific. And that's cool and difficult. And some of them are very hard to say. For me, like if you're coming into wine, let's say you're looking for something like fresh, light bodied and juicy, is like go to Valpolicella. It's such a fun wine. That's overlooked, that's overshadowed by its big brother Amarone. But I had this Valpolicella the other day. It was crunchy, it was like how you guys say in Australia, bunchy, fresh, fruity, easy, but still had the acidity and savoriness and salinity that you get out of Italian wines. I also think always to Campagna for like Fiano. Can't have enough of that. Verdicchio from the Marche. I think the beauty of Italian wine is there's so much good wine at a relatively good price point that you can kind of go in blind and just experiment. And that's what I always tell people is like if you're new to a place, just find a wine shop that you like, have a conversation with the shopkeeper or whomever's working there and be like, this is my budget. This is what I already like. I want to explore Italy. Can you pick out 6 bottles for me? The best wine drinker is an active participant because like I can't control your joy, but I can help you find it. And if you tell me your likes and dislikes every time, take a picture, keep notes on your iPhone and be like, I like this. I'm going to be able to provide you something enjoyable. And so with Italian wine, it is truly exploring because there's so many crazy grapes. You can't have any more preconceived notions about anything in Italy. There's like Lambrusco is not what you may have read or thought it is. Wine from Puglia is not what you think. Sparkling wine's not what you think. But not everything's Prosecco. Right? Not everything's Pinot Grigio. And no offense to those, there's both great examples. But if you know those words, start with a word you don't know.
And as you say, I mean, there are so many things as well in Italy as anywhere else in the wine world, things that are at different stages of their trajectory. You hit the nail on the head with Italy that you can find a lot of things at affordable prices and be given an emotion, taste something actually quite upfront and frank and raw in a way in some of those wines. That's, I suppose, what a lot of the cuisine is. It's quite accessible, but also it's got personality and it's not trying to be too smooth and polished.
Like you said, the food is accessible, and at its core, it's simple but extremely complex. Like cacio e pepe is like one of the most simple things. There's 4 ingredients, but it's extremely hard to make well. And when you make it well, it's delicious. It's life changing. And that's what like I think Italian wine has. It's this seemingly accessible, simple, but then there's just something that can like flip a switch that can kind of create an energy within the body that keeps you wanting more. And the best part about it is overall, the quality value ratio is extremely high, which you don't get in a lot of other parts of the world.
Obviously, having played roles through retail, through restaurants, various different things in between, your show, your import business to be, and now writing and bringing those things together. How do you see your role now as a communicator?
I think about this every day because I'm really trying to evolve into a person that can kind of make it as easy and accessible as possible. And that's my whole framework is like, it's complicated, but it doesn't have to be. Like I'm trying to take some of the complications out by just being honest, visceral, and emotional. Like I think that's the beauty of wine. It's this thing that you can put on the table that can evoke a lot of feelings. And I want people to know that it's not just a beverage. It's a human connector, and that through that understanding, because everybody's just so worried about, oh, are people going to drink wine again? I was like, yeah, people are drinking wine. Don't worry about it. If you make crap wine, you should worry about it. But make good wine, and people will find you. But it's trying to bring people closer to the way I feel about wine. Like if I'm from, nowhere, Texas, have no history for wine in my family or my culture, and I come to it through this just very emotive way, I think communicating that it's accessible and it can make you feel good, not in the alcohol way, just in the intellectual way or the emotional way. That's what it's really about, is finding joy.
Yeah, going back to your hospitality idea, in the earlier days, I guess, showing them a good time, but also expanding people's idea of how good a time that can be.
And it's just like, you think about, like, for us, as people who've been in the wine trade for a long time, it's just, I think about going back in my experiences. Like, I remember having this experience with my wife in Rome, just like drinking a box of wine and having a great focaccia sandwich, and that being extremely memorable. And it wasn't necessarily about the wine, but it was part of the story, because, like, we're in Rome, we're like taking swigs out of a box, eating a great sandwich. Or a very memorable lunch I had with some new Italian friends at this restaurant, where we went just like hog wild and drank so much stuff and paid for it, like literally and physically. But that's an experience that can never be taken away. And I think that's the thing I want people to know, is like, the experiences that you have with your friends or loved ones with a beautiful bottle of wine, you'll remember for the rest of your life. No one can take that from you.
And that's it for this week's podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like it, subscribe, share everywhere. You can also subscribe to my Substack. That's edmerison.substack.com. Comments are welcome. Let me know what you'd like to hear more of. In the meantime, huge thanks to my friends Lucas James for the music, Neil Williams for the artwork, Elizabeth Clancy for the editing, and of course to my guest, Jeff Porter. Until next time, live wine to the fullest. Cheers.